Welcome to Implement This with Microsoft Business Solutions MVP Britta Rexstead and co-host Matthew C. Anderson, where we have an insider's discussion around the things we consider when implementing Dynamics 365. In today's episode, sponsored by D365UG, Britta and I continue our discussion about Excel templates in Dynamics 365. The user group for Dynamics 365 and CRM, D365UG and CRM-UG, is powered by users for users and specializes in the delivery of member-driven education, networking, and events that help you to maximize your current Microsoft Dynamics investment. Find out more at crmug.com. We thank D365UG for their sponsorship, and now on with the show. So we're back now with another episode of Implement This. Hi, Britta. How are you?
Good, Matt. How are you doing?
I am doing phenomenally. Thank you for asking.
Do you have time to talk about Excel?
Oh, do I ever have time to talk about Excel?
Yeah.
Let me clear the calendar here.
So, Matt and I first bonded and became friends over our love of Excel. I think one of us looked over at the other one's screen and went, wait, did you just do that in a formula? And then we were friends for life. So, actually, this podcast was first going to be an Excel podcast. And then I'm really glad it grew into what it is
Yeah,
today.
me too.
And so we got to dabble a little bit in a past conversation on this podcast about Excel templates. But considering the level of nerdiness that we both have for Excel and the love and passion for it, and I know we just scratched the surface on Excel templates.
Yeah.
And so I would love to take that conversation a step further.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. Just the power of Excel templates and what they have to offer, both from a power user perspective as well as an administrator perspective, but frankly, even to just your average person who the way they, do some things like, what if, or planning something out or putting ideas together, Excel is that approachable place. It's the most heavily used business intelligence tool in the world. So the fact that is right there and baked into the platform is fantastic. So let's do it. Is there anywhere in particular you'd like to go?
I'd like to get deeper into formulas because that's something we're both really interested in. And there's so much opportunity in the Excel templates to assist users who might not be someone you can teach a formula to, but you can help them benefit from it. Something I used to do back way before we had Excel templates is I'd have these elaborate processes where users would export an advanced find and then paste it into an Excel-based or macro-based Excel template and then hit a button and then it would run and I do formulas for them.
Yeah.
And it was really scary and intimidating and they had to trust me a lot to get all the way to the end. And so I love that we can help them do formulas that might be a little too hard to teach or maybe it's just not in their wheelhouse. We can empower them in that way.
Cool. So I'd love to dive down that topic. I mean, there are a few broad categories that come to mind. The first one, which is a little more foundational, is around the way that data comes out into an Excel table inside of the Excel template that comes out. Another thing is just some of the specific formulas that kind of come to mind as good starting points. And then, maybe have that meander off into some other related topics.
Sounds good.
Okay, cool. So I think the first thing that comes to mind with the table structure in there is for a lot of people who have played with Excel before, they haven't necessarily used the tables feature inside of Excel. It's if you're listening along and you're trying to think about what I mean by this, it is inside of Excel, you have all your rows and columns and they start out that nice, lovely white background color with light gray lines in between them. And in some Excel workbooks, you'll see that they have kind of a more colorful, usually like alternating colors between rows, visualization of it. And it looks a little bit different. Some people would say nicer. Some would say they maybe don't look that nice, even with some of the different color options that you have. But it's more than just kind of a pretty visualization. There's a lot of structure that you get with tables.
So I still don't quite understand the difference between like a table and a sheet. Maybe it's just a terminology thing. Can you clear that up?
Yeah, so within an Excel workbook, that's the file itself, the .xlsx file, you have, at the bottom, you have tabs going across the bottom. And those are each a worksheet within your Excel workbook, right? Or Excel template if it's coming out of Dynamics. Now, inside of any one of those worksheets that you have, you can define a specific set of the cells to be a table. So it's saying within this sheet, there's a specific range of information that's going to have a little bit more structure around it. And some of the structure that comes out of the box from just Excel is that you can only have as far as a column header, you can't have any duplicates there. So every time you have another column, it has to be a uniquely named column that's part of that. And there are reasons why. And one of the big reasons why is that when you start doing things like writing a formula that references something inside of that table, you can do it based on the name of the column, because each of those columns represent, some sort of field that you have. And when you're writing a formula, rather than saying, cell C7 times cell B7, if you can say price times quantity, well, that makes it a lot more straightforward when you're building out that formula. So going back to the Excel templates side of it, when you have your view that you're looking at inside of Dynamics and you export that into an Excel template, the Excel template, as we talked about in the previous episode, has a handful of columns that have been defined as far as what's going to be exported there. You have control over that. And when you start adding in additional formulas that you want to then extend that information with, you can do that referencing the information in that table, or doing the reference to the actual name of the field rather than just like a cell number.
Nice.
Yeah. So what this means is when you first get your information that's been exported to Excel and you want to start putting formulas in there, you can, the first thing you're going to want to do is expand the size of the table off to the right-hand side. And there are a couple of ways to do that, as is often the case with any Microsoft product. One is you can just insert a column immediately to the right-hand side of that table. That will format it the same as the table that's on the left-hand side. The other option that you have is if you go to the very lower right-hand corner of the table, there's a little box that you can grab onto to be able to extend over so you have more columns that are available to you. When you do that, it's going to automatically put a generic name of that new column up at the top of it. So when you do that, you might extend it out 3, 4, 5 different 5 columns. It'll just give it a generic name for each one of them and a different name for each one of them. So the first thing you'll want to do is go ahead and update the name that's given to each of those. Have it make a little bit more sense. You're using the example I had of, price and quantity fields you probably want to have, if you're going to use those in a formula, you want to have an extended price, as perhaps the name of one of those. Mm-hmm. You can have things like spaces in there, so you don't have to use, weird underscores to be able to name each of your fields. Quick note on that. I highly encourage you not to use the name of any of your CRM fields in the names of those additional columns you put in there, because when CRM is using that Excel template and it's doing the export, if there's something that matches the name of a field inside of CRM, it's going to try to pull the data from that field.
Is that just on the entity? Because we're only using one entity in Excel template, or is that so? Right. If I'm doing an export of accounts, is it okay if that field exists on leads? Yes.
So great point on that. It is only within the entity that you're going to be exporting this template from. Mm-hmm. So great point on that.
And so it's probably a good question to ask yourself anyway. If you're using a formula to create data you already have in CRM, why aren't you just pulling? If you don't have extended price already, why not?
Yeah.
Should you maybe. Maybe Excel isn't the place to do that. So formulas here would make sense for unique things you're not already tracking in CRM. Sometimes to reach a decision point or to make a chart light up or to make something else happen, we have to create more data in the report, but we don't have to track that in CRM. So it seems like that would be what you'd use those additional columns for.
Yeah, and so an easy example, one that I've run into before, is like a weighted forecast kind of field. You may have your weighted forecast out of the box field, but are you actually using it as it's configured inside of Dynamics? Not necessarily, but if you're exporting opportunities and you want to do some sort of weighted forecast value that could be based on lots of different fields, the stage that it's in, and a confidence factor, and estimated revenue, and several different things, those could be modeled into a weighted forecast. But just don't name it the same as something inside of CRM, or you're going to get some wonky, sometimes unexpected results.
So you have to be careful of things like a rating or a priority or probability or things like that.
Exactly.
Or that would make sense that you'd be doing calculations to come up with that answer, but you got to be careful.
Exactly. So, going up a bit of a level from the detail that we're at here, so we've got the Excel template that's been downloaded that you're going to be building out and starting to put some of these formulas into, and you're starting to leverage additional columns within that table. And one of the reasons why it's important to use that, to have the formula be baked into the table in that way, is consider that you don't necessarily know how many records are going to be exported whenever you have somebody running an Excel template. So, in when you're setting it up, maybe you have 200 records that are coming out, but somebody's going to export it later and they're going to have 500 records that come out with that. Well, by nesting your formula into a column of the table, it's going to automatically fill that formula in for every row that's being exported. So you don't have to proactively copy it down to 100,000 different rows because some data set might get to that many rows. It's like, no, that's kind of silly. It's not the right way to do it. It's not a best practice as far as how you're structuring that. You want it to be baked in as part of your table. And fortunately, with Excel templates, we get just that. It makes it very easy. It encourages the right kind of behavior.
Nice. So
there are reasons where sometimes you don't want to use the structure of the table for some of your formulas. We'll probably I'll probably cover some of that in a blog post, because seeing some of that is really helpful there, and I think we'll have plenty to talk about in this kind of next level deep of Excel templates here without going there. But I'm just going to say, as a general best practice, leverage the tables kind of the way they're meant to be used. And that's a great education opportunity for anybody who's maybe played with Excel and is trying to figure out, where can I learn a little bit more that's going to be able to help me out, both in Excel as well as in using Excel templates. That's a great spot to be able to go and look.
And what is that spot specifically?
Tables.
Tables,
okay. Understanding how tables work and how they're supposed to work.
Got it. Okay, so going to docs.microsoft.com, research tables, and then you'll learn from there. And I love when multiple Microsoft technologies are at play. I loved this when I was learning mail merge back in the day. So that I had everything that the Dynamics community had to offer me on mail merge, but I actually had everything that the Word community had too. And there's so much you can learn on Excel.
Yep.
So don't get stuck in the Dynamics box of thinking about how to do this in Dynamics. Think about it in Excel, and then go research in Excel, because there's so much to learn there. But luckily, that's all in one place now. So docs.microsoft.com is your friend. Yeah,
absolutely, and it's really fun seeing all the different applications that are out there and represented on docs.microsoft.com. Feels very, very official.
Yes, yeah, I really like it.
So, kind of continuing down the road of the formulas discussion, there are a few pretty common formulas that I end up seeing or seeing be used within this. A couple of those are very straightforward, which are like sum and sum if. These especially, as well as count and countif. So where these are being used the most is trying to aggregate across a lot of records within a data set. And this is a place where you can build this formula to be able to get an aggregate total. And this is one where you don't even necessarily have to bake this one into each individual row, because you're not really getting that summary total or summary count of a specific row. It's just not that common of a case. But this is where you use that one of those, sum or count, sum if or countif formulas to be able to aggregate information that's going to go onto like a front page dashboard or a summary total, or breaking things out across a few different categories. And within those formulas, you can then reference the table name as well as the column names that you're going to be using. So you're still taking advantage of some of the capability of the tables, and you have these very human readable type of formulas if you need to go dissect it later. Mm-hmm. But you're not necessarily burying it within within the table itself.
Oh, okay. Nice. And that still, so we were talking about in tables how one of the reasons to use tables is that if you have 500 rows this time and 750 next time, it's going to get the right number of rows. Mm-hmm. Where do you put the countif so that still applies?
So you can put the countif anywhere that you want to. The trick is, think of old Excel. I would do a countif and I would reference a range that says cell A2 to A500. But instead of doing that, I would reference in my formula the name of the table and the name of the column that I want to have there. And you don't have to commit to memory what the name of the table is and what the name of that field is. You can just literally go with your mouse and highlight it to be able to get it, and it will fill in the name of that field for you, or the name of that column for you, as well as the table.
Nice.
Just make sure that when you're selecting that range that you get the whole thing, not just a portion of it. Otherwise, you could accidentally get just the relative range. Mm-hmm. But it really opens up some good capability there, and it makes sure that you're not going to miss any of those records, kind of as you were mentioning.
Yeah, it's a great, having it that dynamic is really, really great. I'm always suspicious when I get data where the count of something is a very round number, because to me that so many times has meant someone thought we would only ever have, at the very most, 8,000 of these. So they put the limit at 10,000, and then, the day that we have 10,000 is the day that we broke the sheet. And so seeing that dynamic, it both is just a good thing to think about when you're taking over someone else's Excel work, and then a great thing to think about when you're building out things like this. You don't have to know, even in the business case, how it could be used or how big that data set could ever be, because it is nice and dynamic like that.
Yeah.
Cool. Very cool.
Yeah. So continuing through to a different type of formula that is pretty common when building out that kind of summary page about information that's coming from an export from Dynamics through an Excel template is using the VLOOKUP formula, and the slightly more advanced version of that being the index and match formulas
It's interesting that you say that that's more advanced, because I use index match on everything, and I teach index match. And it might be because I don't understand VLOOKUP. So it's interesting. I would have flipped those the other way. I think people tend to... Is there a reason you should use one or the other? I think everyone has a favorite, and they always use that one. Do you have a theory around that?
So I guess... So the first one I learned was VLOOKUP, as far as being able to go and find relative information based on something you're looking up. And I think taking a step back here, giving a little bit of context as to, okay, VLOOKUP or IndexMatch, what are we even doing with these? And the concept of using one of these formulas, there's also an HLOOKUP formula. So VLOOKUP, HLOOKUP, or index and match. But what these formulas are meant to do is you provide a piece of information, and based on that piece of information, this formula is going to look into a set of records and find something. It's going to try to go and find a match and find some other related piece of information about that now matching record. A very simplistic example in the context of a Dynamics implementation is I have a list of opportunities, and I want to go find out who the owner is of an opportunity for a specific customer. So if I provide in a formula, either a VLOOKUP or an index match formula, the thing I would put in is say, okay, here's the customer name, and then the piece of information that I'd get back out is, and here is the owner of the record associated with that customer name. So that's kind of the big picture of what you're doing, and there are many, many, many reasons why you might want to have one piece of information and want to go find a related piece. So back to your question of like, which one do you learn? Which one's better? Is it just a preference thing? So VLOOKUP, pound for pound, has been much easier for people I've taught it to understand, because there are fewer pieces of information that you have to provide. There's less complexity to the formula itself, but it's more limited as far as what you can do with it. You get one specific named range. The first column is where the thing that you're looking up has to have a matching value, which is not the case in an index match. You have you're going to provide a number of columns over from that first column where you're going to find the corresponding information, and from there you can also say kind of true or false of whether it's going to be an exact match or the closest match. And that closest match has some assumption around like your information being stored alphabetically, which may or may not be a good assumption that's out there. So if your data is structured in a very specific way, then VLOOKUP is a super easy way to learn how to go and find that relative information. If your data isn't structured in that way, index match is probably going to be a better way to find it. But it comes at a cost because there's more stuff that goes into the formula. You have to figure it out.
Well, it's two. And we don't clarify that for everyone listening. It's index match for those of us who use it without even thinking about it. We think of it as one formula, but really it's two. You have a formula to find the match, and then another formula to actually index or present the data you're looking for. Yeah. So it's more to learn. Yeah. And it can look scarier. Yeah. When you're typing it out too. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, and just for the sake of saying, the spirit of, what we're going through here isn't that, if you want to use Excel templates, you have to know what all these things mean. These are like really good formulas for you to know that can be very useful because you have a structured table of data. In the case, where I was talking about VLOOKUP and saying if your data happens to be sorted alphabetically, well, when you define your Excel template, you can choose what the sorting is going to be, and that's going to be stored in that Excel template. And any future export using that template is going to follow that pattern. So you can really help yourself out, help other users out, or whatever by defining some of those things. But with that, you just having an understanding of some different formulas, some different ways to get to this information can be very, very valuable.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I like to use index and match, not to spend too much time on that, but I like to use them deconstructed sometimes too. Mm-hmm. I use match all the time to figure out if it exists. Mm-hmm. So I have something I'm looking for, and I'll run a match to figure out, because that's my fastest way to find missing data. figure out that, oh, there isn't actually a match for that. We don't have that opportunity in this sheet, or something else I'm looking for is gone. Or then once I have the match identified, then I use index a lot. I might reuse index 4 or 5 times off of having found one match. And so it can be a nice way, not just for presenting data in a report, but also for kind of sleuthing when you're trying to get to the bottom of a problem.
Yeah, and when I think of these types of data sets and index match, the first thing that comes to mind for me is using it in combination with some formula fields. Like, I'll have a list of opportunities that comes out, and I will assign via a formula a numeric value to each one of those, kind of stack ranking them, so I can see what are the biggest deals versus what are the smallest deals. And then using index and match, I can go and get the information that, the piece of detail or information that I pass in is, I want the number 3 biggest deal, and I want to get the details about it. Who's the customer? What's the dollar amount? What type of sale is this going to be? And the only piece of information I need is, I need the 3rd biggest one. So 3 is what I pass in, and I can get out all of that other related information. Index and match provide a really powerful way to do that. And if I think of the different worksheets that I have in my workbook, maybe I have a top 10 deals worksheet that kind of deconstructs the information about just those in particular. And I can have that in kind of a nice snapshot type of format rather than having to kind of sort a page and copy paste somewhere. It just makes it very straightforward. And that's one of the first use cases I think of for an index match.
So where do you surface all of this data? We've talked about the formulas, and what we're really trying to do is take the work out of it for whoever is using this template. So maybe they don't have to know formulas. We can do that on their behalf. But what do you actually do with it at the end? If you've got all this complexity, so you're figuring out what your 3rd biggest deal is, and then you're running these other count ifs and other things on it, and it's sparkly and shiny, and you're proud of it, but the salesperson doesn't care. Sorry, Matt. They don't. What do you do with that now?
The sales manager we built it for really cared, though.
Yes.
But so you bring up a great point, and just as a best practice with these, as there is more, anytime you're introducing that type of complexity into a template like that, having like a front page, like a worksheet where literally it has some information about the instructions and how you use it, or a definition of what the purpose of this actually is. If there are steps that need to be taken by somebody, or they need to be aware of some assumptions that are going into what's there. Maybe a reminder that if you use this against a small data set or a large data set, what the impact of that could be if it's doing some analysis. So any of that information, if this is for consumption by somebody else, I like putting all of that into its own assumptions page or assumptions tab within that workbook. And then when I save the template before I upload it into Dynamics, I will make sure that is the active sheet that I save before doing that upload. And by doing that, when somebody runs it, the first page they're going to see is that list of instructions and assumptions and that detail for them. And also probably some contact information if they have any questions. Who do they go to?
Do you include information in there about sharing the document or updating the document, or how that all works? Because the user might have some false assumptions on how easy or hard that would be to pass along.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair one. I haven't done much of that. I mean, I've done some disclaimer type of stuff of like, hey, you're taking data out of the system. It can immediately become out of date. Also, if there are restrictions as far as who can see what information, some of those type of disclaimers. But I haven't had a lot of other kind of necessary language that's gone in there, and maybe that's an oversight on my part, or it hasn't necessarily come up.
Okay, I think it depends on the organization too.
Yeah,
how strict they are on that kind of communication around data security, and both the insight that this data is now leaving the system And so it is going to go stale. And then also the understanding that all of the security that you have baked in doesn't apply once you print something. It only applies inside the system. So this is similar to that.
Cool. Well, I feel like that's a pretty good place to wrap it up for now.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. Thanks, Britta.
Thanks, Matt.
You've been listening to Implement This with Britta Rexted and Matthew C. Anderson. Do you have a business problem you'd like us to discuss on the show? Reach us through our website, implementthis.org, where you can also subscribe to the podcast. We're on Twitter, too. Britta is at MacGyverCRM, and I'm at MC Anderson. Thanks so much for listening.